There's an interesting subgenre of horror films that's been making a resurgence in the 2010s with movies like The Lighthouse or Mother. These are special movies in the horror genre that don't rely on jumps at all. In fact, graphically, these films aren't very horrific at all either. They rely more on what I like the most: dread. In a horror movie that focuses on dread, you're already aware from the very beginning that something is wrong or something bad is going to happen. The Killing of a Sacred Deer is one of these movies.
I can come closer to where you are. Are you at the hospital? I can bring you the apple pie.
And if you're new here, welcome to my channel. This is Lemony Fresh. I mostly talk about movies, doing movie reviews, TV commentary, and movie commentary like this. If you like this video, please give it a like. And if you're interested in more content like this, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching. Now let's start. The Killing of a Sacred Deer is a 2017 film directed by Yorgos Lanthimos and written by... Okay, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this. These two guys. The movie is about a surgeon, Stephen Murphy, played by Colin Farrell, and his strange relationship with a young man, Martin, played by recent shining star Barry Keoghan. Future Keenan here. This actor is actually named Barry Keoghan. I'm going to say it wrong the rest of the video. Just bear with me. We find out that Martin's father had died from a car accident, and that Murphy was the surgeon who had attempted to save his life, but failed. Murphy feels an extreme guilt about this, and he seems to sort of act as a surrogate father figure for Martin. Their relationship kind of builds to a peak point, and it gets kind of weird. Martin is a strange character himself. I wouldn't say he has some sort of mental disorder, but he comes across as just off. He states a lot of things very matter-of-factly, and he seems to miss a lot of social cues, or even at times just lacks emotional empathy. Stephen even brings him home for dinner to meet his wife, Anna, played by Nicole Kidman, his daughter Kim, played by Raffey Cassidy, and his son Bob, played by Sonny Suljic, who we can only expect more great stuff from in the future. Martin in turn invites Stephen over to his home for dinner with his mother, who's played by Alicia Silverstone. I haven't seen her in a movie for at least 20 years, but she's really good in this for the very small role she plays. Anyway, Martin's mother makes advances on Stephen, which he immediately declines. And these aren't even overtly sexual. She just starts sucking on his hands for some reason. It's really weird. But this seems to be some sort of recurring theme that they do bring up later in the movie again, but if there's a metaphor there, it's beyond me. And that's something I think you also have to take note of before watching this movie. It's a very heavily metaphorical movie, and a lot of it is symbolic. So if you're used to straightforward narrative films, you might not enjoy this. But if you're kind of okay with seeing where things go and not being totally satisfied with every answer, then you'll really enjoy this type of movie. And honestly, there are so many metaphors in this movie that discussing them deserves its whole other video. Stephen's daughter Kim falls for Martin for whatever reason, and the two begin a sort of strange relationship. Actually, pretty much every relationship in this movie is very strange, which is fine for this genre. That's actually what I kind of expect going in. I'm sure there's some sort of personal interpretation you're supposed to be making about the characters, because not a single one of them have a healthy sexual or romantic relationship. But I guess I'll have to leave that up to you to decide. So the main plot of the movie finally comes around after Stephen begins distancing himself from Martin, once Martin's requests become a little too much and a little too weird. Martin tells Stephen that the time has come that we've always feared, and he accuses Stephen of being responsible for killing his father, and therefore to balance things, Stephen must kill a member of his family. If he doesn't, then his family will go through 3 stages. The first is paralysis, the second is refusal to eat, and the third is bleeding from the eyes, at which point whoever's suffering from these symptoms is close to death. Stephen brushes it off as bullshit and cuts Martin out of his life. But then Stephen's son Bobby wakes up one day lacking the ability to walk. They rush him to the hospital and perform some tests, but nothing is determined to be wrong with him, and he recovers enough to leave, only to be readmitted on the way out. It's not long after that the daughter, Kim, also becomes paralyzed, and now both are refusing to eat and must be fed through tubes. And basically what happens from here is the rest of the movie, so I won't go too much further into the plot. I love movies like this, movies that are so very grounded with their realistic characters, realistic settings, and realistic life portrayal, I guess. And everything could happen in the real world, in grounded reality, except there's one tiny thing that's very different and supernatural, and nobody really gets an explanation as to why. For example, in this movie, there's absolutely no other paranormal element aside from the fact that this character, Martin, has some sort of power to exact what he considers justice. I love this type of horror movie, which usually falls under the psychological thriller genre, which I think is, honestly, it deserves its own subgenre of horror, because there are other psychological thrillers, but they're nothing like this. And there are a lot of similar movies to this one. This is a type of horror movie that relies purely on metaphor. Violence, pain, and shock are not necessary for this genre. The terror comes from the emotional and psychological trauma of their characters. Actually, let's talk about those characters, because I think one of the greatest strengths of this movie is the acting. The film's main character is played by Colin Farrell. I've seen many of Farrell's films, and while he's had quite a few high-profile roles, he's never really done anything that made him really stand out for me as an actor. But my God, is he good in this movie. He takes everything with a doctor's frankness and is short with everyone, even to the point of insulting them right to their face, which is understandable considering the circumstances that he's in. But of course they don't know that. It is kind of funny though. I think that he's the character you're supposed to relate to the most because he kind of follows the plot the most closely. But at the same time, he's always making decisions where you don't know what he's going to do next. And it's not like for the sake of randomness. It's based on what their character has shown before. So you don't feel cheated, but you feel surprised because you don't know what's going to happen. And that keeps me wanting to watch the movie. This isn't a long movie, really, either. It's 2 hours, which is pretty, standard for today. But you really just get right into it. The mother character, played by Nicole Kidman, who comes across as very different in this movie to me, also really shines and exemplifies this trait the most, I think. I understand what she is going through, and I feel like she takes a more level-headed and reasonable approach to the situation than Steven. But then out of nowhere, she'll just start doing things, and it's kind of tricky to understand why, but maybe that's not the point. Barry Keoghan plays a very strange and very disturbing Martin. If it's hard to know what the other characters are going to do or their motivations, then you have absolutely no idea what Martin will say next. I've seen Keoghan in different roles in the past 5 years, and I cannot wait to see what he does next. The most recent thing I've seen him in, aside from this movie, was The Green Knight, and I thought he was absolutely fantastic in that role. He's very good with little nuances that he shows with his characters, particularly this scene.
It's his fork and he twirls it around and round and round and round and round. Then he sticks it in his mouth.
Like, why does this seem so menacing when it's just some kid who's kind of weird eating a bowl of spaghetti? I don't know, but it's really just one of the strengths of this movie. And while I loved his recent performance in the movie The Green Knight, I actually feel like his role in The Killing of a Sacred Deer is his best performance. While he doesn't carry the movie because the acting talent around him is really good as well, had they not been, he could have easily carried this movie. I definitely think he will become one of the actors to follow for the next couple of decades. So again, back to the metaphors. This movie is very metaphorical. It will test your patience if you have a short attention span for movies like this. Even though I understand that this movie is focused on the atmosphere and takes a more artsy direction, the first act of the movie is really long, and it's a huge hurdle to get over. You're kind of just waiting for the first hour or so for a character to have a call to action. There's a lot of setup in this movie, but once you get over that little hill of exposition, suddenly it just goes like that, and it wraps up really fast. But the simple plot of the movie, which I believe is based off of a Greek myth, is not really the draw of the movie. You're meant more to focus on the emotions that the filmmakers want to convey to you to feel. And if there's one thing that does this particularly well, it has to be the score. In between the standard dramatic melodies are heavy scraping and static sounds that really keep you on the edge of your seat. The whole time. I personally haven't seen Lanthimos' other films, but if you do follow his work, his other more popular films are The Lobster and The Favorite. I'll be sure to be checking them out after seeing this one, because he's definitely a director to be keeping your eye on. I can't wait to see more stuff from him. Now, for me personally, I probably won't be watching this movie again. I might maybe just go through the details, but for me, with movies like these that are so dreadful and like just very depressing, I can only really watch them once. But that being said, I think that everybody should watch this movie once, because it's so different. At least Lanthimos is out there doing something actually different. A lot of these other movies just feel like, okay, that just came and went, who cares now? But there are very few directors like this in Hollywood right now who are actually making things that make you think about them the next week or even year. That being said, I still like the movie. I don't think there's too much more I could really say about this movie without giving too much of it away. I just really highly recommend you see it.
We got that fire, and we're gonna let it burn, 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 burn. We're gonna let it burn, burn, burn.
Now I mentioned that, oh, by the way, I forgot this was going to be a double feature. I'm doing it now. Anyway, I was saying that The Killing of a Sacred Deer is one movie that makes me feel incredibly uncomfortable and gives me a serious sense of dread, to the point where I find that itself horrific, and much more than any graphic display of violence or death or anything like that. Just scary images, horror shit. But there are a few other movies that belong to this subgenre of horror, and one particular that I've also seen recently reminds me very much of The Killing of a Sacred Deer. Melancholia. Melancholia is a 2011 film directed by Lars von Trier. It stars Kirsten Dunst and Charlotte Gainsbourg as the two main protagonists. Kirsten Dunst is actually very interesting in this movie. I really love when actors or actresses who are kind of just in pop movies, they never really get like any real leading roles that challenge their acting, end up doing movies like this later in their career. I know she did movies with other, good directors like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind and The Virgin Suicides, but I think that this movie in particular is probably, well, for sure it's my favorite performance by her. I was not expecting this at all. She is so great in this movie. And of course, Charlotte Gainsbourg is a very competent actress as well. She's also worked with Michel Gondry in The Science of Sleep. Also, she's worked with Lars von Trier on many of his other movies, such as Nymphomaniac and Antichrist. Not a big fan of Antichrist. And that's why I was kind of nervous about going into this movie. But I still thought that the premise was very interesting. So let's get to that. The premise of Melancholia is that there's a planet maybe 10 times the size of Earth that's going to do a flyby, and it's going to get pretty close. The actual story goes in a different direction. The movie is separated in two parts. So chapter 1 is about Kirsten Dunst's character. Justine has just been married to her new husband, Michael. With some struggles on the road, they end up arriving to their own reception 2 hours late. The reception is hosted at the extravagant estate of Justine's sister Claire's husband, John. John is played by Kiefer Sutherland, and I've never really seen a bad role with him. I feel like a lot of people don't like him for some reason, and I'm not sure why. Of course, I really like him also as Big Boss. He was a great replacement for David Hayter. I like him in his other roles too. This one in particular is very different from what I've normally seen him in, though. He's not really a tough guy or like an action hero or anything like that. In this movie, he's much more of a intellectual character. He plays Claire's husband, who's closely following the planet's approach. He kind of has a hobby in this. Obviously, he's insanely rich because his estate is very large. They have a whole stable of horses for each of them. They have a whole riding area just for each of them. That's how big it is. It's a very nice place. And of course, the wedding is just as extravagant. But what I like about his character is that because he has this hobby in science and he's very interested in this approach of this other planet, he seems like the type of guy who probably got successful because of his intelligence. So it's interesting to have a character like that, especially in a very surreal movie like this, who's much more grounded and very relatable. I think he's probably the most relatable person in this movie, although Justine's sister Claire probably would be as well. Anyway, back to the plot. The movie is mainly about Justine. So part one is basically... Actually, there's a part before this I forgot to mention. There's this entire sequence at the beginning that's almost operatic in style. There's a purpose to watching this first, even though it just sums up the rest of the movie. If you really wanted, you could skip it and just go straight to chapter 1. Because it is kind of drawn out. Honestly, I feel like with a movie like this, it's best to just experience the whole thing as it was intended, because there's definitely an artistic approach here. So anyway, the first part just deals with Justine's wedding to her new husband. The wedding is at John and Claire's lavish estate, and many of their family members are in attendance. Particularly Justine and Claire's mother and father, who are no longer together, and both very foul characters on their own. Justine's father, played by John Hurt, is just an arrogant, weird, creepy old man who's just an asshole. He plays stupid games with the waitstaff with these spoons. He's such a dick. Like, he's the type of person who any sense of, like, power they get, they're just gonna abuse because they think it's funny. And they're, like, completely non-empathetic. And her mom's not that much worse for wear, really. Their mother is presumably alcoholic, has some sort of severe emotional problems, and is just a really bitter person. She gives a horrible speech at the wedding. Not that the father doesn't as well. So they already come from a pretty messed up background. The wedding is especially focused on building up Justine's character. Everybody at the wedding is just asking her to do something, or just wants something from her. Nobody really cares how she's feeling, which is important, I think, as a theme in this movie. But it's also maybe a little understandable because Justine herself is kind of annoying. Not only does she arrive extremely late to her wedding, in the middle of the reception she decides to start taking a bath. At the same time, her mother also decides to start taking a bath, so obviously I guess she gets it from her, though I wouldn't be surprised that she gets some of her foul behavior from her father as well.
Those bitches have locked themselves in their bedrooms, and now they're taking a bath. Is everybody in your family start raving mad?
And this is made much worse by her boss, who also attends the wedding, played by Stellan Skarsgard, in probably the role that he's such a sleazebag in this movie. Basically, he runs a big ad company, and she's like his main talent. So even at her wedding, he's still going after her for a tagline, and he gets some guy to trail her through the whole wedding just to get the next big idea she has. What a dick. Though he does also promote her at her wedding too, to the management of advertising or something like that. It's kind of unclear whether she even wants this, because she seems to hate her job, but she just kind of ends up doing it, I guess, because that's just how she feels she has to live through life. And Claire and John themselves, while they're well-intentional, they kind of always imply, oh, this wedding's for you. We're paying for this for you. This is so much money. Even though they're doing it for her happiness, it's kind of more so that they can get over her.
I smile and I smile and I smile.
More than her being genuinely happy. Because she's still not very happy with her fiancé, who's actually played by Stellan Skarsgard's son, Alexander Skarsgard. There's a whole family of them. The second part of the movie is about the sister, played by Charlotte Gainsbourg, Claire. So in this part of the movie is the day after, or I guess it's the week after or so. So it's kind of revealed that Justine is the one who suffers from, I guess, melancholia, which is an extreme depression. It's so bad that she can't even move at one point. She's almost catatonic in state. And she just manages to limp into a cab and make her way over to Claire's house so she can take care of her. It's so bad that she doesn't even want to take a nice hot bath. Just the idea of doing anything for her is just pain, I guess. Or it's just so, she's so shut down, she can barely even function. She does end up getting over this, and they spend the next couple of days just around the estate, kind of taking it slow to recover, help her recover. There's a lot of kind of weird things going on, but I wouldn't say there's kind of this implication that there is maybe a supernatural element, but it's still left ambiguous. Because the movie stands alone regardless with the situation they're in, where this giant planet is crossing paths with Earth. Eventually, the planet does come close enough that you do see it in the sky, and it's one of my wife's worst fears. So watching this movie for her was very panic-inducing. I'm not sure if there's a name for that, but I'm sure it's some sort of phobia. But anyway, it just gives you this real claustrophobic feeling the entire movie. And they took such a good choice with how they did the sound for this movie, because when the planet comes really close, the entire length of the movie that it's nearby, there's this very drowning, like, pressure building, like, background sound that's very subtle, but it's there. It's just this constant hum in the back of the speakers. It's really cool. I like it a lot because it just adds to the claustrophobic feeling that there's just something blocking your vision, and it's so loud that it's like you can just hear the pressure on your ears. And that's exactly what I feel is this sense of dread. That's the horror I'm looking for in movies like this. Honestly, it's really hard to go further into this because I don't want to give so much away, and a lot of this movie is mainly how you experience it. So it's hard to describe an experience to somebody, and if I do that, it might ruin the movie for you. So really the best thing to say is just go watch it and pair it with The Killing of a Sacred Deer. Like I said, I'm not a fan of Lars von Trier, but I think this movie is his masterpiece. I still don't think it's perfect. The first act could have been a lot shorter. It feels disconnected from the rest of the movie. I understand what they're trying to do, and they're trying to kind of establish some background and some motifs for the movie later on, but they still feel like unbalanced for some reason. Like maybe there should have been a third act as well. But anyway, there's a great double feature if you want to be very depressed for one weekend. Thanks for watching. I plan to do more of these double feature episodes every so often. I just kind of have to think of them, but I'd like to keep it going at least one time a month as a special feature. So if you're interested in more stuff like that, please consider subscribing. And if you like this video, please give it a like. That's all I have to say about it.